This is a quick video on the sheep brain. We're going to look at 3 different orientations. This is the whole sheep brain here. This is a mid-sagittal section of the sheep brain. And then this is a coronal or frontal section of the sheep brain. So let's take a look at the whole sheep brain first. Here we can see the cerebrum and the cerebellum, and this down here is the spinal cord. This, we're looking at the anterior surface of it here. And on the anterior surface of the cerebrum, we can see that we have sort of this hill and valley structure. These hill areas, these areas that come up in the cerebrum, those are called gyri, or each individual one is called a gyrus. And the areas where we see an invagination in the tissue, these are sulci, or each individual one is called a sulcus. You can see that we have a large invagination here along the center, and that's called the longitudinal fissure. And if we could pull the brain apart, we would see that there is a bridge of tissue that we would hit connecting the two sides together, and we'll see in the mid-sagittal section that that is the corpus callosum. If we take the whole brain here and we turn it over so that we look at the inferior view of the brain, we can see, and we'll start anterior, we can see the olfactory bulbs here. So here's an olfactory bulb and here's an olfactory bulb, and that's responsible for the sense of smell. Those would sit right above the cribriform plate and the ethmoid bone, and they are going to receive sensory information from the nasal epithelium, and they're going to take that sensory information through the olfactory tracts. So this is one olfactory tract, and this is one is more clear than on the other side. So the olfactory bulb, the olfactory tract. A tract is to the central nervous system what a nerve is to the peripheral nervous system. So that's an olfactory tract. And let's see if we can't see the one over here. There it is. So there's the olfactory tract on the other side. We also have optic nerves here. So we can't really see the optic nerves in this brain because it's been cut, but we can see where they've been cut. So the optic nerves would emanate from here and from here on the other side. And what we're looking at here in the middle is the optic chiasm. And that is the area where these optic nerves meet and cross one another. So the information from the eye that's on the right actually gets read by the occipital lobe that's on the left in the brain, and vice versa. So those cross over at the optic chiasm, and that's what you see right here. And then proximal to that, we see the optic tracts. So these are going to be taking the information, the sensory information that's coming in from the retina of the eye to the brain where it is going to be interpreted. So those are the optic tracts. And then we have the mammillary body. The mammillary body is right here. The pons, so we're continuing to move inferior, and now we are in the brainstem. So the pons is this area that kind of sticks up, and it looks a little bit more smooth than some of the other areas here on the inferior surface of the brain. So this is the pons right here. And right underneath that, we see this, it's enlarged relative to the spinal cord. This area here of the brainstem is called the medulla oblongata. So the pons, the medulla oblongata here, and then below that is the spinal cord. So this is the spinal cord down below. And then for the rest of these on my list, we need to turn it back over again and look at the superior surface. So I mentioned before the cerebellum. Cerebellum is important for motor control and coordination, and it is this area here. And then we can see the corpora quadrumina. So the corpora quadrumina, we need to sort of move that brainstem forward, and hopefully you can see that there are 4 little knobs here at the back of the brain, and those are actually a little bit more symmetric in the human than in the sheep, but those are the corpora quadrumina. And then the pineal gland, or pineal body, and that's going to be tough to see, and I've only got one hand, but that is going to be just superior to the corpora quadrumana. So that is that area right in the very center that you see there above the corpora quadrumana is the pineal gland, and that is responsible for secreting melatonin and making you sleepy when it's dark outside. So looking at our mid-sagittal section, so to orient you with respect to the whole brain, this is the brain that has been cut down the middle. So we're looking at it cut down the middle and looking at the medial surface here. So if we had gone through that longitudinal fissure until we hit tissue, we would be at the corpus callosum. So this is the corpus callosum. It is a commissure or a bridge of tissue that connects the two sides of the cerebrum. So we've got the corpus callosum, which is, it is down here. So it is this area down here. We have the septum lucidum or pellucidum, which is a window between the lateral ventricles. So you can see we're moving toward a lateral ventricle would be here, and the septum pellucidum must be on the other opposite section of this mid-sagittal section because we don't see it here. But it would be a tissue window covering right here between the corpus callosum and the fornix. So this is the fornix down below. That's also a commissure or a piece of connected tissue bridge between the two cerebral hemispheres. Then we have the corpora quadrumana. So you can see the corpora quadrumana. Let me just to orient you toward what we were looking at before, right in there. And here it is from the mid-sagittal section, right back there, because remember we could see it when we separated the cerebrum from the cerebellum in our whole brain. The pineal gland, so the pineal gland is right in here. Then we have the cerebral aqueduct. So the cerebral aqueduct connects the third and fourth ventricles. I'll show you the third ventricle in a frontal section or coronal section here in just a second, but we have the fourth ventricle is right here. It is along that anterior surface of the cerebellum, and it's very small and hard to see, but it is this triangular space at the anterior surface of the cerebellum where it is connecting to the brainstem, and this would hold cerebral spinal fluid, and that open area right there would be the fourth ventricle. The cerebral aqueduct brings the cerebral spinal fluid to the fourth ventricle. So this is our cerebral aqueduct. We can imagine cerebral spinal fluid flowing through there and then filling up our fourth ventricle in vivo. And then that fluid is going to flow from there. It's going to come out and it's going to go through the central canal of the spinal cord. The arbor vitae of the cerebellum. So you know already this is the cerebellum, and arbor means tree. So the arbor vitae is this branching tree-like structure that we see in the cerebellum. All right, we've only got one section left, and that is this coronal section here. Now, the coronal sections might look a little bit different depending on how far anterior or posterior we are in the brain. But I think I can hit all the structures that are on our list here in this particular coronal or frontal section. So the longitudinal fissure, remember, is going to be that space that we see between the two cerebral hemispheres. So it's here. And it comes down until we hit the commissure, which is the corpus callosum. So the corpus callosum is going to be this area here along the top. It is what we hit when we come down the lateral fissure there. And that corpus callosum is going to go along the top of our two lateral ventricles. So we have a lateral ventricle here, and, excuse me, we also have a lateral ventricle here on the other side. The septum lucidum is going to be the little window that is in between. So here at this area, and because these areas are not filled with cerebral spinal fluid. It's very, very small, but it is specifically that piece of tissue between the two lateral ventricles. And our third ventricle is down here. It is the open space down below, which would also contain cerebral spinal fluid. Gray matter and white matter. So gray matter is actually on the outside, on the exterior surface of the cerebrum. And so it would be this area here. And there's a little bit of color change for us just because this area has been fixed for quite a while. But know that it is going to be the most superficial here of the tissue. The gray matter contains cell bodies of neurons. And then the white matter is going to be more internal, and it contains myelinated axons. Okay, and then as we come inferior, this is the thalamus. So the thalamus is this large kind of, almost looks like cheeks or something, but this is the thalamus, and it surrounds the third ventricle. So we already identified the third ventricle here, and we'll have thalamus on either side. And that intermediate mass of the thalamus is the commissure that connects the two sides of it. And that's it.